Hey everybody, it's Miss Williams, and this is our first video for the school year for AP Statistics. And we are starting in Chapter 1, and this is just the introduction section. So it's not going to be too long, about 4 or 5 slides. Okay, we're going to start with what are individuals and what are variables. Individuals, when you collect data, are objects described by a set of data that can be people, animals, or things. A variable is any characteristic of an individual. A variable can take different values for different individuals. Variables are broken up into 2 types. You can have categorical variable, which places an individual into a group or category. That would be like if I looked around the classroom and I wanted to collect data on my students. One categorical variable might be their gender, male or female. Another categorical variable might be where they went to middle school. Did you go to DuPont Tyler? Did you go to Donaldson Middle? Did you go to other? Okay. The other kind of variable that you can collect is quantitative variable. These take numerical values that it makes sense to take an average. So in other words, numbers, almost all the time, quantitative variables are numbers, but not all numbers are quantitative variables. For example, again, if I'm looking at the individuals in our classroom and I wanted to collect data and I asked them how old they are, how many months they've been alive, okay? And I collected data on 10 people. Well, it would make sense if I did the average of all those months that people have been alive. It would make sense to take the average of that. Something that wouldn't make sense to take the average of if I asked everybody to tell me what zip code they lived in. Well, it wouldn't make sense to take 10 people and average their zip codes. That wouldn't give me an average zip code that they live in. That doesn't even make sense. Okay, so if it's a number, it usually falls into quantitative variables, but not always. It only falls into quantitative variables if it makes sense to take the average of it. Okay, categorical, quantitative are the 2 kinds of variables. And the last thing on this slide is distribution. It tells what values the variables take and how often. I had 4 people live in zip code 37080. I had 1 person that was male. Okay, tells what values the variables take and how often. Alright, so let's say I collected this data I did a census at a school that had international students. These kids were from Canada. Alright. And as you can see, I asked what province they lived in, what their gender was, what language they spoke, and I gave that a 1, 2, 3, or 4 value, if they're right or left-handed, what their height is in centimeters, and how they prefer for me to communicate. So who are the individuals in my data set? The individuals are the students that I actually took data on. What variables were measured? Well, I just listed those. Provenance, gender, language, right-handed or left-handed, height, and communication. And then what if I asked you to describe that individual right there? Well, I would say that is a male who is from Ontario. He speaks the language that I have designated as number 4. He is left-handed, 169 centimeters tall, and he likes for me to communicate with him through his cell phone. Okay, so from a two-way table here, we can decipher all those things about that one particular student. So you're going to have to know how to read two-way tables. Here's a checks for understanding. What if I said Jake wants to find out about the cars that are in his school parking lot? He goes around the parking lot during the school to collect some data. He collects the following on each car: model, year, color, number of cylinders, gas mileage, height, and whether it has a navigation system or not. So on your own, and I'm not going to answer these 2 questions. Who are the individuals in Jake's study? And what variables did Jake measure? And can you identify each as quantitative or categorical? So just, you don't have to write the question, but put these 2 questions, answers to these 2 questions in your notes, and I will check those when I come around. All right. And finally, inferences. So the point of statistics is to draw inferences on the data that you've collected. That is drawing conclusions that go beyond the actual data that you have in hand. So I've collected all this data, so I'm going to make an inference about my total population usually. All right. So that's it for this slideshow. Nice, short, and sweet. Make sure you have this done when you come into class, and we'll work some problems, and we'll move on to section 1.